The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of Green Acres and our guests. These general gardening tips and suggestions may work for you, as well as those from alternative sources. When using any garden products or tools, read and follow all label directions. And learn how to make your yard summer strong at bewatersmart.info.
The Green Acres Garden Podcast is the podcast dedicated to helping gardeners hone their growing skills while we celebrate our love of plants. So whether you're new to growing or a seasoned gardener, you're sure to learn something new. Join the fun as we have conversations with world-class growers, passionate green thumbs, and professional garden experts from Green Acres Nursery and Supply. Listen every week. We'll answer questions you didn't know you had. Here we grow. Hello there and welcome one and all to the show. This is the Green Acres Garden Podcast, the home for all you green thumbs and plant lovers out there. We have a great episode for you this week. I got to sit down with David Mizejewski and have a great talk. David is a naturalist. He's an author. He works for the National Wildlife Federation. David's been a TV host for Animal Planet, Nat Geo Wild, and so much more. He's an expert on where humans and nature come together, and we got to have a great talk about how we can actually support the plants and animals in our own regions, in our own backyard, with our own backyard. It's pretty cool. I had a blast. David is, he's so bright and brilliant. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this. And if you like it half as much as me, I think you're going to love it. So without further ado, let's get into my interview with David Mizejewski. Today, David, we're here to pick your brain all about ecological gardening. We want to dive into your book and hopefully learn all that we can from you. Are you ready to rock?
I'm ready.
So, David, please tell us what organization you're with and why ecological gardening means so much to you.
Yeah. So again, my name is David Mizejewski. I'm a naturalist with the National Wildlife Federation. We're one of the oldest and largest wildlife conservation and education organizations out there. We focus largely here in the U.S. If you grew up reading Ranger Rick magazine, that's the National Wildlife Federation. And we do our wildlife conservation work in a whole wide variety of ways. We're out there like many other organizations, advocating for good wildlife policy and laws that protect our wildlife species, our open spaces. But we also do, some species-specific work. We do a lot of work, though, getting people connected to nature. So I mentioned Ranger Rick magazine. That's really all about teaching kids about wildlife and nature and inspiring them to get outside. But we've got some really cool programs like our Schoolyard Habitats program that's all about helping schools create natural gardens that they can not only support wildlife, but then get used as outdoor classrooms. We've got curriculum for teachers that they can actually use in the classroom that will teach everything from the life cycle of a butterfly to age appropriate climate change information. So there's a whole really wide breadth of work that we do at the National Wildlife Federation. But one of our signature areas of work kind of is the intersection of all those different things. It's about protecting wildlife, restoring wildlife habitat, but also getting people connected or reconnected to nature. And that is a sort of an umbrella of work that we call Garden for Wildlife. And this is that idea that we all have the power to restore a little bit of natural habitat literally right outside our doors if we just kind of rethink the ways that we're, kind of gardening and landscaping and maintaining our own little piece of the earth, our own yards, gardens, and, kind of natural communities. And so we started this program all the way back in 1973, so over 50 years ago. It was originally called the Backyard Wildlife Habitat Program. And really the idea behind it was just taking wildlife biology 101, looking at what wildlife species need to survive, and adapting that for not, sort of our national parks and wilderness areas, but applying that to the home landscape, whether that's, in a typical suburban yard or a big rural piece of property, or even in the middle of the city, quite honestly, where you might not even have your own yard. And it boils down to four things. All wildlife species need natural sources of food. They need a water source. They need cover, places to get out of the elements, to hide from predators, or, for predators to hide from their prey so they can ambush and get a meal. And then all wildlife species need a place or resources where they can raise their young or reproduce or whatever their species does. And so if you they need that out in the wilderness, but they can also get that right in your own yard or garden space. And that's what this program that we launched all those years ago is all about. I've written a how-to book on it that got turned into an Animal Planet series called Backyard Habitat that I hosted. We did 47 episodes, and that kind of launched my career at the National Wildlife Federation, not just from being a naturalist at a nonprofit, but to kind of being a little bit of a media personality and getting out there and using the airwaves, TV, radio, podcasts, whatever media platform there is. I want to be out there taking advantage of it to get people excited about gardening for wildlife, about native plants, about natural gardening. And so it's kind of a long-winded backstory for me, but that's who I am and what I do.
I love it. We talk about this a lot. I think every week, some episodes we're really focused on how to increase the productivity and what the garden kind of provides for us, the individual. But it's so cool in your book, Attracting Birds, Butterflies, and Other Backyard Wildlife. You kind of set out. You mentioned all those main headings, those main
Habitat,
sections:
food,
the food, the water, the places for cover, the places to raise young, and of course, it all wraps up with sustainable gardening practices. So, what is ecological? What for the normal person when they hear ecological gardening principles? What does that entail for them?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to think about it is to just kind of keep in mind that we choose how we maintain the space around us. And a sustainable kind of natural ecological garden is just kind of asking the question, can my garden and my landscape be beautiful and functional, but also support all the life around me? There's countless wildlife species that can happily coexist right alongside us if we just give them some habitat. So, when we talk about wildlife habitat gardening, of course, we're not talking about mountain lions and moose and grizzly bears, right? We're not telling you attract those kinds of animals. We're talking about wildlife that a lot of people don't even think of as wildlife. We're talking about insects, butterflies, bees and other pollinators, fireflies. There's thousands of species of insects that are, totally harmless. And in fact, many of them are beneficial to us and to our gardens that you want around. But they're disappearing because all we have is lawns and pesticides, right? I'm talking about songbirds, right? Who doesn't want more beautiful songbirds in their yard, or hummingbirds, or birds of prey even, cool hawks and owls, right? The wildlife I'm talking about are the amphibians, this really cool salamanders, and even the frogs and the toads, and the reptiles like, the turtles and the tortoises, depending on where you live, right? These are all wildlife, and they're wildlife species that, again, can, live in harmony with us, and quite honestly are disappearing rapidly, and they need our help. And so we have this huge opportunity, this huge footprint of the human-dominated landscape, right? Our cities, our towns, our neighborhoods, again, whether it's urban, rural, or suburban, that we could be doing a lot more to help support our fellow species, right? And so that's the idea of ecological gardening. It's like, how do I do this better? How do I make a garden that's actually living, that is actually green, not only visually, but in the actual kind of ecological sense that we use it? And that's really what the National Wildlife Federation's Native Plant Habitats movement and wildlife habitat gardening movement is really all about. It's what my book is about as well. And so, I've already alluded to sort of the secret sauce, the magic formula. The guiding principle for anybody thinking about, well, how do I make one of these natural landscapes, is to start by thinking about, how is my landscape, my yard, my garden, whatever you call it, how is it providing natural sources of food, water, cover, and places to raise young? And then the second question is the way that I'm kind of maintaining and caring for this garden space, is it actually supporting that life, or is it inadvertently killing it? And so we can get into all of that step by step.
That's great. I love that you made that point, because I find that the landscapes that are kind of more basic, where it's just lawn and maybe some basic evergreen shrubs, they look green, but the greenest landscapes are the ones that tend to be the most colorful. So I noticed in your book, you really talk a lot about bringing in the pollinators with native wildflowers and things like that. And for me, those are some of the most beautiful landscapes, because not only are they feeding all these creatures, but you tend to get a really good mixture of colors as a almost like a side bonus, in my opinion. I loved all that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a whole aesthetic overlay to this as well. And one of the awesome things is that this continent, this country is filled with such incredible diversity. I'm an East Coaster. I live in New Jersey. My garden and landscape and the plant palette that I have to work with and the habitat features that I'm going to create are going to be really different than, maybe somebody in Wisconsin. And both of those are going to be really different than somebody in Arizona. And all of those are going to be different than, Northern California, right? And so, or they should be, right? But you just said something that I think is really important. I travel all around the country and I see the same landscapes. And it's really sad to see, landscapes all across this wide swath of geography, right? And all of these different ecosystems that we have, all this incredible diversity, and to see the same, yew shrub and Japanese holly and lawn and, junipers, right? That found coast to coast. It really is sad because we have such a huge opportunity to be celebrating that local flair, right? That local plant palette, and we're just not doing it. And by default, when you create a wildlife friendly garden, you're going to be tapping in to that local diversity of plants.
When it comes to the native species, why is it so important, and how are they so helpful in providing the food, the water, the cover, and the places to raise young? How is it? Why is it so important?
Most people listening probably are familiar with the concept of native plants. And this is actually a kind of a cool thing because when I started doing this work, a quarter century ago, I always start my talks by asking people, are you familiar with what native plants are? And back in the early 2000s, very few people would raise their hand or, say, oh, yeah. And today, almost everybody does. And you can't open a gardening magazine or a garden website or listen to a podcast without them addressing native plants. And that is the coolest thing to me because in my lifetime, in my career lifetime, I have seen the needle move. And I think that's really important. And that's why I want to highlight it because it oftentimes seems overwhelming, all the bad news, right? Bad news ecologically for our wildlife species, politics, the whole nine yards. And I just want to highlight this because I think it's an important, I don't know, thing to remember is that sometimes change doesn't happen overnight, but if we keep doing the good work and keep, putting ourselves out there and having hope, honestly, we really can begin to move the needle. And so I have seen that happen in these last 25 years where people are getting a much greater awareness about native plants in particular. And so your question is, why are they important? Well, let me take one step back and explain something that a lot of people might be confused about too. Like, what the heck does a wildlife conservation organization have a garden program for, right? Why are we talking about plants and landscapes? Well, it's because plants are the foundation of wildlife habitat. You can't have healthy wildlife populations unless you have plant populations because plants are the foundation of the food web, right? They pull in energy from the sun and water from the soil and nutrients from the soil, and they turn it into food for wildlife, either directly, the herbivores that are eating the foliage or eating the berries and things like that. And then of course for the predatory species that are eating the animals that eat plants, right? You have none of it unless you have plants. So that is why a wildlife conservation group who's trying to support wildlife populations, animals, is advocating for, people planting things that are going to support those wildlife populations. The plants are, some definitions of wildlife include plant life as well. So they, by that broad definition, they're wildlife too. So that's a core concept here, right? Like plants are wildlife habitat, and what plants you choose can dictate whether or not you have robust, beautiful wildlife populations, or you have a dead zone, right? And so this is where native plants come in. So native plants, by really definition, are just the plants that naturally occur ecologically in your region. And they have evolved there over the course of millennia. And they are pretty much in sync with all of the local conditions, the local climate conditions, and the resulting weather conditions, and the soil types, and the temperatures, and all of those things. And importantly, they are also in sync because they co-evolved right alongside the local wildlife. native plants and native wildlife in many ways are like two pieces of a puzzle. If you take one away, they rely on each other. And oftentimes the populations of the other ones plummet. And so, unfortunately, just plugging in a random non-native plant from somewhere around the world, it doesn't do it because those ecological relationships don't exist. And that's really what ecology is all about. It's all about the relationships between the different living things that inhabit a particular ecosystem, and the non-living elements as well. And so, the two pieces of a puzzle thing, think about pollinators, right? Well, speaking about butterflies, right? One kind of pollinator, and moths too, the Lepidoptera, they have evolved to have immunity to the toxins that plants oftentimes produce in their foliage to keep animals from eating their foliage, because plants generally don't like to be eaten. And so they produce these toxins and it kills off insects that try to eat them, or at least, makes them taste bad. So butterflies and moths have evolved immunity, but they can't be immune to every single plant toxin. So they've specialized. And so their caterpillars, the sort of their larval form, they have evolved to be able to feed on the leaves of only a certain number of plants, that they have evolved this immunity to that plant's toxins, right? And that's what we call a caterpillar host plant. And so those caterpillars can't eat any other plant. And so the classic example of that are monarch butterflies. So monarch's only caterpillar host plant is milkweed. There's several dozen species of milkweed, different milkweed species in different parts of the world, but that's the only group of plants that these caterpillars can eat. And one of the reasons why the monarch butterfly is almost gone, the western population of monarchs west of the Rockies, there's less than 1% of them left. The likelihood of them going extinct in the coming decades is something like 60%. And it's not much better here in the East. The Eastern population has declined by 80 to 90%. They're actually being proposed to be listed and protected under the Endangered Species Act right now. And so it's in part because we have gotten rid of all the milkweed. We've sprayed pesticides. We've converted the native, sort of grassland habitats where the milkweed naturally grows into lawns and strip malls and giant agricultural farms where we're spraying tons and tons of not only insecticides, but herbicides that kill off the milkweed, right? And so this is one of the factors in the disappearance of the monarch butterfly, which used to be super common. And so this is where we have power as individuals. If I plant some native milkweed in my yard, and you plant some in your yard and some of the other neighbors do, and then we get the whole community doing it, suddenly we have exponentially increased the places to raise young, one of those core habitat components, and food too, right? It's food and places to raise young. And so that's what this is all about. That's what this whole Garden for Wildlife movement is about. It's about planting the native plants that have these deep, long-term relationships with their fellow wildlife species. And, if we can all do that, again, it's a very simple way to add back a lot of habitat.
Absolutely. You talk about these benefits for the animals, but I feel like the ultimate goal is it benefits us, the gardeners, the growers, the humans. If we can take care, if you really want to just be selfish about it, ultimately all that work and the effort and planting in these natives and creating a beautiful landscape that has a lot of diversity through the season of flowers and food. Everyone gets to benefit when you start planting the right plants in the right place.
100%. Yeah. I would never, sort of lie and say, I'm doing it because I just want to save the wildlife. I want to sit out in my yard and, have my coffee in the morning or have a beer and be surrounded by this. I get so much out of it, just again, the fresh air, it's good for us physically. It's good for us mentally. It's, in many cases for a lot of people, it's good for us spiritually. Right. And so absolutely, people, again, are part of the landscape. This is for us. And, one of the things that I write about in my book is making a space for you. Make a beautiful, wildflower garden, plant a, sort of a shade garden if you have a lot of trees, and make it a woodland experience, but put a little seating area out there, right? Like position your water feature in a way that, again, even if you're doing the dishes inside, you're looking out and you're getting to see that, right? Plant the most fragrant flowers right next to your window so that you can get the waft. It's so much about us as well, and there's nothing wrong with that, right?
Yeah.
In fact, I think that can be a motivator for people. You can do this in a way that is beautiful and that is also meaningful from an ecological point of view.
Absolutely. So now we're in autumn over here. It's fall. I know over there on the East Coast you get a really nice crisp fall with those beautiful fall colors. I'm a little jealous, but that's okay. So around here the leaves are starting to drop, and we always hear, oh, rake them up, bag them up, compost them, whatever. But you have a bit of a different approach, and we've been talking about this with a few people leading up to this about leaving the leaves and the idea of that there's a ton of value in that material and what that, as those leaves decompose, as they create that nice leaf litter and it starts to break down, create leaf mold or whatever. There's so much going on in there ecologically, to use your terminology. Why should we do that? Why is there a benefit to leaving the leaves as opposed to just having this perfect, tidy little neat garden where there's nothing out of place?
Yeah. So the National Wildlife Federation, a few years ago, we decided to designate the month of October as Leave the Leaves Month. It starts in September some places, it goes through into November. So it's our month where we really focus on that. And so, the idea behind this is that this is part of that sustainable gardening, that natural gardening technique that I was mentioning before, that goes along with providing the four components of habitat. And there's really, I guess I would say, kind of three main reasons why leaving your leaves on your property, as many of them as you can, is really important. And the first is, well, let me say it this way. What happens when the leaves fall, right? They fall, they cover the root zone of the trees and the shrubs, or even the deciduous plants that are going dormant for the winter, right? They lay on the ground right over the roots where they retain soil moisture, where they suppress weeds, and where they slowly compost and return the nutrients right back to the root zone of the plant. That sounds an awful lot like mulch and fertilizer. And you know why? Because that's what they are, right? That, like, the fallen leaves are Mother Nature's mulch and fertilizer. And so we've been, over the last 50, 80 years, we have been pretty aggressively marketed to and trained by, big lawn care companies and chemical companies to get rid of that, to spend all of your fall weekends out there with the rake or the leaf blower, bagging these leaves up and throwing them away, and then turning around and going and buying mulch and fertilizer. It's absolute insanity, right? So one of the main reasons to leave your leaves on your property is that they're a free resource. And they're what Mother Nature intended to be used as, again, mulch and, again, eventually fertilizer. So that's not a small one, right? I mean, who wants to spend money when you don't have to? Who wants to give away all your leisure time on the weekends in the fall when you could, you still might have to move them, right? If you have a lawn and a bit thick layer of leaves, it's going to smother your lawn, which to me is a good thing. And I would say, yes, let that lawn get smothered. But we know that not everybody can do that or even wants to do that. So yeah, the idea is not just, let them sit on your lawn if you can't do that. But what you should do is rake them. Don't use a leaf blower, please. I hate them. They're so loud and obnoxious. Use a rake. It's good exercise, and just move them into your landscape beds and use them as natural mulch there, right? Free resource. The second reason is, it might be a little bit surprising because it actually has to do with a global issue. And so here's what happens when we bag up our leaves and we throw them out. They go to the landfills where they get buried underground. And in those oxygenless conditions, called anaerobic conditions, when organic material like the dead leaves break down, they produce a gas called methane. And methane is one of the most potent greenhouse gases that traps heat in our atmosphere. Well, it turns out that, according to the EPA, our landfills are the third largest source of methane pollution. And so the landfills are belching out these gases of methane that are going up into the atmosphere and trapping heat, which of course is what is causing the global climate change that we've been seeing for the last several decades, right? And it's estimated that there's about 10 million tons of yard waste, about 12% of the contents in our landfills is that organic yard waste. And of course, a huge percentage of that is the fallen leaves. Some of it's grass clippings and things like that. So it's a massive amount that we are sending to the landfill of this organic yard waste, fallen leaves that has this connection to climate change. So please don't throw away your leaves. Keep them on your property. Use them as the natural mulch. When they break down and compost, above ground, they don't produce the methane, right? And so, if you don't have enough garden beds to use all your leaves, fall's a great time to create some new garden beds and plant. It's the best season to plant, right?
Oh, yeah.
You can do that. You can also, you can put them into your compost bin. You can just make a big pile of leaves somewhere on your property, and they'll break down into that leaf mold, which is, a really rich kind of fertilizer that you can then spread in, around your landscape later. Those are all okay things to do. But the third reason is probably the one that's kind of most germane to the National Wildlife Federation, and that is that natural leaf layer that forms is critical habitat for thousands of different species of wildlife. It's where they're finding their food. It's where they're taking cover, hiding from predators, getting out of the elements, overwintering. And many species actually rely on that leaf layer for their reproductive cycle. Keep your leaves on your property, as many as you can. Don't feel guilty if you can't keep them all because you have nothing but oak trees on your property, or maybe you don't have enough space in your garden beds to use them all. But the best thing, do something with them other than throwing them away. Give them to neighbors. I actually walk up and down my street with a tarp and rake all of my neighbors' leaves that they've blown out onto the street and drag them into my yard to use as natural mulch. Keep them out of the landfill. If you do compost them, or a lot of people will want to shred them. You can use a mulching lawnmower and chop them up right back into your lawn as long as it's not too many. Those are all okay things to do. Of course, it kind of eliminates the wildlife habitat value of them, but it's certainly, those are much better options than throwing them away. So yeah, hopefully we'll inspire people to do a little bit more of this. I do want to give one caveat though, and it's pretty important, particularly in places like California where, wildfire is a risk. You really want to make sure that if you want to, even in the big picture, have a naturalistic landscape, which oftentimes is a little bit more plant dense than a conventional landscape, you want to be mindful that you're following proper fire safety protocols, and you want to maintain defensible space. And so at the National Wildlife Federation, we've actually we've developed some resources for folks that might find themselves in that kind of scenario that will give you some guidance on how to still have a native plant type landscape where you're using the natural materials, but you're doing it in a way that is compliant with, the local ordinances and that kind of thing. And obviously safety first is really important. So I wanted to make sure we addressed that, but you can find those resources on the National Wildlife Federation's website, Fire Safe Landscapes.
Awesome. For someone who's just starting out, David, what's, starting out in their garden and maybe considering, doing some ecological garden practices, what is one small thing they can change or do today to begin gardening a little bit more ecologically?
I have to start the list with just committing to planting some native plants. You don't have to be 100% native. You don't, again, have to be a botanist. It's more and more accessible to find native plants at nurseries. You want to, try to stick with locally native plants wherever you can, but just start there. Just plant a few natives and commit to doing that. That's the easiest thing. And, who doesn't love to plant more plants as gardeners, right? We're plant people. We love buying plants and getting
Guilty.
them in the ground, right? Yeah. So the second thing that I would say that's really, really top is stop spraying pesticides. It's so bad. I hate to say it, but I'm cultivating this natural landscape and I look out my window and like all of my neighbors are hiring, mosquito companies to come just, in the middle of the day, blast with backpacks full of broad spectrum insecticides that are killing not just the mosquitoes, but the bees and the butterflies and the fireflies and the ladybugs and the dragonfly and so on. And it's horrible. So yeah, in a home landscape, look, we got tried and true organic gardening techniques. I've never really had to spray any kind of pesticide in any of my landscapes because when you have a natural landscape, it's almost by definition diverse, right? It's got its own little ecosystem going on. And I have all of those beneficial insects and I have the birds, and I have the tree frogs, and so on and so forth that are helping to keep any potential pests under control. And so it tends to sort of balance itself out if you just let nature take its course. So those are really the top two things that I would say is, plant some more natives, quit with the pesticides. I cover some organic gardening techniques in my book, but again, so much has been written. It's such a well studied type of gardening that the information is out there, and there are alternatives that won't make you have to rely on these just really horrible pesticides that are doing a huge negative impact on our wildlife, on our air, on our water, on our pets, on us. These are not good for us either.
Gardening gives me a lot of hope, gives me a lot of joy, and it does so much for me. And so I'm hoping to hear from you, David. What gives you hope for gardening and conservation and that relationship moving forward?
Well, I think it's that I've seen it work, as we've talked about in my own career, and my own time, even just at the National Wildlife Federation. I have seen the needle move. I've seen more people become aware about this kind of ecological gardening and why it's important. I've seen it really grow in the horticulture industry. I see it and hear it talked about and written about in way more than it used to be. So that gives me hope. The other thing that gives me hope is something that one of my heroes, the late Jane Goodall, one of her messages. And I think about this all the time. And she always used to say, like, your life matters. What you choose to do in your life makes a difference. And we all have those choices. And in this sense, it applies to the garden, right? We can choose to have a living garden. We can choose to have a garden that's not only beautiful, not only functional, but that supports life. We have those choices, right? We can bag up the leaves and send them to the landfill. And I think the idea of choice gives me hope, because I know that so many people out there in the world, they're going to choose life. They're going to choose the hopeful thing to do. And the more we are all out here talking about it and living it and being good ambassadors for it and writing books and having podcasts and helping get the word out, I think, it is making a difference. I've seen it, and I know it helps. And so anyway, that's what gives me hope, just knowing that we're getting the word out and people are listening and they're doing it.
There we go. Yeah, some positive momentum, even if if it's slow. It's like filling a bucket, one drop at a time. At first, it just seems like you're never going to fill that bucket, but before too long, the bucket's past halfway, and then we're almost to the top.
That's exactly it. Yeah, and even quite honestly, if we don't get there in the space of a generation, that's okay. Maybe it's going to take 100 years before America has finally given up its lawns, right? And we all have meadows or whatever, right? And I'm okay with that. I don't have to see it. What's important to me is that I'm helping other people learn, and it's that again is just it's for me it's an act of hope.
There we go. Progress, not perfection. David, if you could leave our listeners with one last message about supporting natives, about supporting our natural ecology here in the U.S., what would that be?
Just do it. I mean, I hate to be cliche, but I mean, just get out there and do it. Don't be intimidated. Go to the National Wildlife Federation's Native Plant Habitats website. It's nwf.org/garden. Tons of information there. Pick up a copy of my book. Watch all of our online content. This is a lot easier than you might think it is, and it's way more rewarding. So just do it.
Awesome. I love that. David, there you have it, folks. David Mizejewski from the National Wildlife Federation. You heard it here first, folks. We can make a positive change, one plant, one garden, one person at a time. Well, that was our interview with David Mizejewski. Thank you so much, David. It was an honor getting to meet you. I really loved it. The energy, the passion, the enthusiasm. I mean, it came through. Hopefully we'll get to meet in person one day. Oh, fingers crossed. So one cool thing I really loved about this week's episode is I got my hands on his book, Attracting Birds, Butterflies, and Other Backyard Wildlife. Like I said, it's a beautiful book, tons of great info on how to plant natives and support the wildlife. But what I loved about it is I brought it home. I had it kind of on the table there. I'm researching, reading, trying to learn. I set it down. I go in the backyard to start gardening and do my own, yard work and chores. And I look over, and there's my 4-year-old son. He picks up the book. I didn't even prompt him. He just picks up the book, he can barely even read. He's a 4-year-old. He's got words maybe. He's thumbing through it and he's like, Dad, look at this, look at that. And he's like pointing out all these beautiful birds, the lizards, all the little creatures, because the book does a great job of actually not just showing the plants, but the animals that they support. And there's my son in the backyard sitting in the dirt, just got this book, this beautiful book, just pulled wide open, just thumbing through it. I loved it. And to me, I'm like, that's where it's at. If our kids get fired up about these animals and these plants, then our job is, then I think we're moving in the right direction. So my hat's off to David and his team, and I think we just need more of this. So that's it for this week. Man, I loved it. It's so much fun meeting these incredible people. I hope you all enjoyed this week's episode. Huge shout out to all of the listeners for tuning in. Please come back more. We love having you. Share us with a friend. Check us out on the Facebook group, on Instagram at the Green Acres Instagram page. Check me out on Instagram at Urban Oasis Kid. And of course, you can find us on YouTube as well. Green Acres has a ton of great videos on there with more to come. And until next week, garden friends, please have a great week. Happy gardening to you all. And please never stop growing.